it would be an awkward situation if governments get into financial trouble and the sovereign debt crisis type of situation over these energy bills and over that crisis. Are you worried that if this does repeat and winters are harsh in the future and it goes on for even years, given the escalation in Ukraine from both sides, it seems like this could last for years. Maybe this is a massive incentive for the Europeans to seek peace before winter, before the coming winter. But do you think all of this could lead to a sovereign debt crisis in Europe? Hello and welcome to this week in review with my wisdom teeth. That's right, tomorrow my wisdom teeth are coming out, which is why we're recording this on a Wednesday instead of a Thursday, and why I have a special guest for you today, James Allen, my good friend and the energy expert at Southbank Investment Research. Now, what makes this interesting is that James and I never disagree about anything in person, but once you turn on the camera, things get a little bit more interesting. So, James, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure, Nick. How are you?
Pretty good. We'll see whether it's your pleasure or not. Actually, I'll start by being nice. I want to point out the fact that you traded the European energy crisis rather successfully. In fact, your predictions were completely out there. I couldn't find anything like them on the internet anywhere, and they were right. Most spectacular of all, you predicted that the energy price, no, the gas price in Europe could actually go below zero, which seemed absurd at the time. And then 8 days after you predicted it, it happened, which is pretty damn impressive. What allowed you to do that? What allowed you to see things so differently to everyone else, including me?
We had to remember where we were in sort of the late summer last year. We had seen a huge ramp up in natural gas prices to phenomenal levels. Really, I mean, they started that the previous sort of that year actually already very elevated, and then we got obviously the war in Ukraine started, and there's lots of concern about Russian supplies into Europe, so they've been creeping higher. And then obviously we got the big news about there was an explosion actually for in the Nord Stream pipeline. Lots of concern about the other Nord Stream gas, whether that would flow into Europe. So prices actually reached a whopping 340 euros a megawatt hour, which is completely unprecedented. So they were incredibly high. But actually, if you looked at the sort of fundamentals at that point, already gas storage levels weren't so bad, and the longer range weather forecasts were actually pointing to a relatively mild winter. So it seemed to me that certainly the risk reward there really was on the downside. I think we had, it looked like prices could come off, and they could come off a lot. So so for my service, we set about trying to play that trade. So I think we got in around about when natural gas prices had just fallen below 200 euros a megawatt hour. And right now they're around about sort of 60, 70 euros a megawatt hour. So we actually got out of the trade when they're about 130. So I'm afraid to say we didn't come all the way down to where they are now. But our readers made a nice profit. So that's where we are. That's where we were. I mean. The prices have come off so much, and it seems to me we're probably approaching a floor now in natural gas prices. I think looking at where we are with storage levels and sort of the weather forecast as well. So I think that we it doesn't look like we're going to get a possibility of another rally up to the levels we had last August. But equally, I don't see prices falling too much further south, bearing in mind where we are now.
You started that explanation by pointing out that prices were already higher before the war started. Is that because of the risk of war starting that prices were high, or is there something else going on that was already going on in the gas market, and the invasion of Ukraine just made the whole thing get out of proportion?
Um, Energy prices had started to tip up preceding the war. There, obviously, in the the immediate period before the war, there was obviously lots of concern about what might happen as well, which inched up prices as well. But we have to remember back in the late 21, energy prices across the board, oil. Electricity and gas, they all sort of were rising everywhere, basically. Just the macro story there was one of just very, very bullish supply. Really, I think um, lots of talk about whether it's a renewable story at all, but I would say that wasn't the story. I think it was just everything was pointing up at that point. But got to remember there was lots of lines for petrol and all the forecourts across the UK. That story was replicated elsewhere. And I think the tipping point then became the war in Ukraine, which sent prices into a new dimension.
What do you think would have happened if the winter had been bad?
If the winds had been bad, I think we would have struggled to meet demand. I think that's the real conclusion. I think National Grid said in October that if the winter effectively is bad, there could be some real sort of rationing. I guess there had to be a huge demand response. I mean, there could have been lights out in certain scenarios. I guess I think. Across Europe, it was looking very, very dicey for a while. If the weather had been bad, I mean, we just wouldn't have been able to sort of compensate for the loss of Russian supply. I think we got lucky certainly from a weather perspective. That really helped the situation. I think obviously there's another argument there. We're getting very mild winters at the moment. There's a climate change story there as well, but. Really, we got very, very lucky with the weather. It enabled us to fill those gas storage tanks. I think even in 1 week in early on this month, last month, now in February and January, we actually were inputting gas into the storage sites. Now that is really unprecedented, really, in the gas market. Normally, across the winter, we're withdrawing gas, but the weather in parts has been so mild this winter, it's allowed us to actually refill up these storage sites in the middle of winter, which is crazy, really. So that we're now going to end up finish this winter in March with really relatively high, all things being equal, relatively high storage sites, which puts us in a very good position ahead of next winter. We're still going to be without a large proportion of Russian gas coming into Europe, but actually we don't actually have that much to source to get us back up to sort of 100% storage levels at the start of next winter. So all in all, right now, the gas market is in a pretty good state. There are some wild cards. We could end up with a cold end to the winter, and we also have to watch what's going on in Asia as well. There's some cold weather in China, for example, that will pull away cargoes from the US and other places. The Middle East into China, away from Europe. So if that combined with a bit of a cold spell here as well, we could end up this winter in not as good a position as we're predicting right now. But all things being equal right now, we're going to end up in this winter in pretty good shape. It's a bit of a weather play right now, but prices have come off so much. We still have to remember we are going to be without Russian gas. So I can't see prices going too much further south, simply because we've got, before the war, Russia was supplying 40% of European gas. We're now down to about sort of 25 to 30%. There's a big shortfall basically, but weather-wise, I think we should be okay.
I'm struggling to sort of get the narrative in line, because if we would have been in a severe crisis going into winter despite really good storage, then it's not really the storage that's the issue. It seems to be it's the weather and the continued flow from Russia or other sources. And it bugs me that there's so much focus on the storage side of things, when
Yep.
even if the storage was 150% full, it would still be a question of whether there's continued flow and whether there is a mild winter or not.
Yeah, I mean that is the state. I mean, there are only so many places we can source this gas from. Now, if weather had been cold, if we had started this winter at very low storage levels, we would have had to continue pulling in LNG and pipeline gas from Norway as well, but at extremely, extremely elevated prices. That would still be happening right now. Even under that situation, there still might not have been enough gas. I mean, there might not have been enough gas to see us through, under the worst case scenarios. So we would have got prices remaining at those elevated levels, there would have been chances of supply not meeting demand. I mean, that was a very real situation of possibility heading into this winter. But luckily, from a geopolitical point of view, from an energy crisis point of view, the weather came to save the day. I mean, we have to remember that this wasn't a cost-free exercise. The price was bid up to over 300 euros in the summer last year, and that incentivized LNG to come into Europe at extremely high levels. There was cost for that. It helped push Europe towards a recession. That's a big energy bill that Europe has had to carry to see it through. And then we still got lucky with the weather. There has been a cost to pay. We could argue it was a cost that needed to be paid, unfortunately. But hopefully, bearing in mind where we're going to end up this winter, we won't need to get to those elevated levels later on this year to make sure we have 100% storage full by next winter. But then again, it would come down to weather again. If the cold is going to come back in a vengeance for next winter, even with 100% full at the start of the winter, it's still going to be a bit of a lottery, I guess. So the game now is to try and build as much of we need more LNG import terminals, and ideally, we need to sort of try and cut down some of our demand for natural gas in Europe.
It seems like we cut things a bit fine, and you're very hopeful about next year. But if we're still relying on flows in the end, and Putin does decide to actually cut off Russian gas, we're sort of back where we started again, aren't we?
Potentially, it could be. Potentially, it could be. It could be problematic for next winter as well. I think. Russia. Who knows what card he has left to play? I think he's played some of his big cards already. But he still does control a lot of gas supply going into Eastern Europe. That gas does wheel its way into Western Europe. So there is a possibility of we can have the same story for next winter. But compared to where we were now, compared to 1 year ago, we're in a better position where we are now. Obviously, there's things that Europe are trying to do. We are trying to sort of move away from natural gas. Then this isn't going to happen overnight, but we are seeing actually a response already on that side of things. On the demand side, we're seeing heat pumps, for example, the market for heat pumps going through the roof in certain countries in Europe. And that will take a dent out of natural gas demand moving forward. Next winter, but certainly in the medium term as well. There'll be, there's now a move away from natural gas supply. I mean, I'm renovating a house in London, and I'm putting in an air source heat pump now. It's the maintenance, the running cost now for an air source heat pump, bearing in mind where natural gas prices are, actually, it's moved massively back into favour of electricity, running off electricity rather than a boiler of natural gas. So that is a medium-term situation, a solution that's going to help Europe cover sort of the demand to meet supply moving forward. But yeah, next winter it could also again be a bit of a lottery. I mean, natural gas market has always been a bit of a weather play, but now more so than ever, because we're potentially losing so much of our supply.
You mentioned that the cost blowout there, the fact that it wasn't a free exercise. I think there was a statistic that Germany spent $500 billion to try and get through the winter. That seems unsustainable. It would be an awkward situation if governments get into financial trouble and the sovereign debt crisis type of situation over these energy bills and over that crisis. Are you worried that if this does repeat and winters are harsh in the future and it goes on for even years, given the escalation in Ukraine from both sides, it seems like this could last for years. Maybe this is a massive incentive for the Europeans to seek peace before winter, before the coming winter. But do you think all of this could lead to a sovereign debt crisis in Europe?
Certainly, it has had the potential to. I mean, Europe is teetering on the point of recession right now because of this huge energy bill. It happens. We've already incurred. I think Europe's response has actually been the right one. There's been a massive program to incentivize other technologies to try and move us away from natural gas. I think that is That's the medium term solution. There is obviously going to be a cost to pay, but this cost needs to be paid. I think Europe needs to face facts. We do have to come. We need an energy system which is not beholden to Putin's Russian gas. These arguments were actually made a long time before this war. Europe was getting into bed with Putin and the Nord Stream supply, and lots of commentators, including myself, saying that was a dangerous game to play. And the chickens really have come home to roost now. We should have made this move a long time ago. Looked at alternative sources of supply. We should have started the energy transition sooner. We should have found alternative natural gas supply back in the day, rather than increasing our reliance on Russia. So there is going to be a price to pay. Of course, there is. But I think Europe is responding in the right way. We are looking at alternative renewable sources. We are also, we're trying to cut our demand as well for natural gas, which is the key thing. But yes, the answer there's potential for there will be an economic consequence, I think. But whether it's as bad as you think, I'm not so sure. But I think if we can get through next winter in relatively good shape, I think that actually the demand for natural gas should be at a level where future winters are okay. If you look at sort of the modelling, I think this winter could be relatively tricky. But there's so much happening now on the demand side. I mean, we saw the National Grid have started this trialling with cutting sort of demand for energy at peak times. That is going to be the future, whether it's National Grid or other sort of grids across Europe. With more renewables coming online, we need to sort of balance out that intermittency in real time, and the demand side of the equation is a very the obvious way to do that. I think so. There'll be lots of initiatives like that going across Europe, which will sort of help manage demand and supply. And I think with some alternative renewable sources, with looking at sort of heat pumps, I think Europe, all things being well, should avoid some of the absolute worst consequences in the medium term.
Isn't this a case of putting the cart before the horse? Because surely the energy system's there to supply the economy rather than crushing the economy so that the energy system survives.
But what's the alternative? I mean, we do need, we need to meet our demands. The system is the incumbent system is a natural gas heating system across Europe. We've been beholden on Putin. We've seen that he's an unreliable partner. We need to find alternative sources. And unfortunately, these decisions are now being made in real time. It means that we've had to bid up the price of natural gas to get as much of natural gas as we can in. And we now need to find alternative sources of energy to compensate that supply moving forward. So, yes, I mean, I agree that in a real term, we really should have made some of these decisions a long time ago, so we weren't faced with this crunch right now. But unfortunately, Europe went so far into bed, with Putin, that we've been left really with very little choice now to keep our homes warm and our lights on. I think it's just a natural way that things have had to happen. It's too little, too late in some ways. I think Germany has a lot to answer for. If I'm being totally honest, I think they were. There's so many people saying, going forward with Nord Stream 2 is a very, very bad idea. And Putin has proven that it can't be relied upon, from a security supply perspective. And it's just bad news. But they proceeded. And then, shortly before Nord Stream 2 was probably set to be given sort of the green light in Europe, this war started. And, now Nord Stream 2 is dead in the water. So this is just how it transpired. But it does prove that we aren't going to go backwards. We aren't going to go back into bed with Putin. I think there's a real learnings now that natural gas isn't the future for heating supply in Europe. I think there's a short-term need that, yes, we are going to have to find new sources of LNG. We're going to have to keep getting pipeline gas in from Europe, but sort of over the medium to longer term, that we need to build out our sort of renewable base, really. So, and starting with air source heat pumps, I think that's a promising growing market in Europe, and that will start to take a dent out of natural gas demand across the continent.
Well, James, thanks for sharing all of your analysis, and congrats again on your successful trade this winter, your extraordinary successful trade. I was amazed by it. And to everyone at home, I hope you've enjoyed this winter in review, and I look forward to seeing you again without my wisdom teeth. Thank you.